Well, first of all, I'm very pleased to be here with you today and for the next several days. I echo and agree with everyone else by saying that it's a wonderful thing to have a conference on W.E.B. Du Bois in Paris, in France. And so I too want to thank all of the organizers and so forth. Being somewhat of an organizer myself, I never take organizing for granted. A lot of work goes into that, and I'm grateful to all of you that made this conference possible. Now, for me personally, it is wonderful to witness and to participate in a conference on Du Bois here in Paris, France. When I researched and wrote the Scholarly Guide, W.E.B. Du Bois and the Birth of Modern Sociology, I hoped for a day when Du Bois's work would be highlighted and interrogated, really, around the world. When I published the Scholarly Guide, Du Bois was an obscure figure in the social sciences and in his own discipline, sociology. I want to make the point too, though, that Du Bois always had a prominent place in the humanities. And it's very interesting how he was clear about being a sociologist and a social scientist. And yet that's where the marginalization and the erasure came from. So that throughout my educational career, including my graduate studies in sociology, Du Bois's work is never mentioned, let alone studied. So that I vowed that during my career as a sociologist, I would seek to change this situation. And that I would do so by explicating and interrogating Du Bois's profound sociological insights that are really found throughout his large body of work. My desire to correct the intellectual travesty stemmed from the fact that I knew that Du Bois's work on race and on modernity advanced powerful theoretical and empirical analysis comparable with those kinds of insights we find in Marx and in Emile Durkheim and in Max Weber. In short, it was and is my view that the sociological canon needs to be reconfigured to include the work of Du Bois, and I will discuss that on tomorrow. So that I'm pleased that since the 2015 publication of the Scholarly Guide, scholarly attention to Du Bois's work has exploded. Now, one of the things that I want to say about this, though, is that there existed by the time that I wrote this work, this book, a ferment already underway, a renaissance already on its way, I think, about Du Bois. That if I had never written the book, I think this would be happening. Maybe not right at this moment, maybe not in the manner that it is. But people like Michael Dawson and Elijah Anderson, and many of us have been working on Du Bois for a very long time. So that I don't want to act as if I published a book and then it'll all happen. I do want to say that I think that the Scholarly Guide has functioned somewhat as a guidepost within all of the ferment that was underway. So that in the United States, Du Bois' work is receiving a scholarly revival. The teaching of theory is being changed to include his sociological theories, and his work is being studied by professors and students really throughout the United States. There are now conferences that are being held on Du Bois at colleges and universities throughout the United States, including prestigious ones such as Harvard, the University of Chicago, Brown University. Moreover, to my delight, attention to Du Bois's work is gaining traction in countries outside of America. This has been the case in the UK, in South Africa, in Brazil, and now in France, as other places. So to me, this is such an important and amazing development. Indeed, Du Bois' scholarship spoke to global issues regarding modernity and race. For example, European colonization of Africa, of which France was a part, colonization in Asia and the Americas, and slavery are at the center of Du Bois's work. And there's still much for us to learn from his insights regarding the interaction of race, slavery, capitalism, and colonization. So then I hope this trend continues because, as I said, I think we still have much to learn about the contemporary world by studying the theoretical and the empirical scholarship of W.B. Du Bois. Therefore, I salute this conference that's hosted by the University of Chicago Center here in Paris. And I hope that in Paris, in France, this is only a beginning so that Parisian scholars and students will continue to pay serious attention to Du Bois' scholarly work, for that work will help France to understand itself, and it helps us to understand the modern world more generally speaking. So that's my statement. Now I should just go on with the panel? Okay. So it is indeed my pleasure to share this panel on Du Bois and Pan-Africanism. And we have two scholars who are going to talk about Du Bois and Pan-Africanism. I think that the format will be that each will speak for about a half an hour, and then we will have a Q&A. And according to my records here, the first one, and by the way, I fretted over this a little bit because I really don't speak French, and I hate to mess up people's names and so on and so forth. So just forgive me and correct me when I do that. But I think it's Sakiko, is that right? Nakao. Oh, good. Okay, then. And she is from the University of Paris. And is it Diderot? How you spell that? How you spell that? Diderot. Good. Good. And I should say that she has received a postdoctoral. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Social Sciences, studies in African, American, and Asian worlds, and an overseas research fellow of the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. And so that she holds a PhD and a master's degree in history from École des Hautes Études in Social Science from here in France. I know I messed that up, but I tried to get close. Okay. A master's degree in European Studies from the University of Tokyo, Japan. And of course, she's done much very important work, and her current project continues to question the construction of the African identity from the perspective of African foreigners in reference to inter-regional and transatlantic migration in West Africa. And she's published many works related to this topic and to others. And so it's my pleasure to introduce you this morning.
Thank you, Professor. And I'd like to thank you, the organizers as well, because I'm very glad to take part to be part of this colloquium. So let me start. William Edward Burger Du Bois is certainly one of the first figures to be listed among the protagonists of Pan-African movements. The term Pan-African first appeared in 1900 when the Pan-African Conference took place in London. Du Bois, along with Henry Sylvester Williams of Trinidad and Benito Sylvan of Haiti, contributed to organizing the conference, which aimed at bringing together people of African descent dispersed all over the world. This vision, gathering people of African descent dispersed all over the world, is at the very heart of Pan-Africanism. And yet, not much has been said about its early connections with the movements on the African continent led by local leaders. In the common historiography of the Pan-Africanism, there is a kind of disruption between the period preceding the Fifth Pan-African Congress held in Manchester in 1945 and the period that followed, considering the latter as the African period of the Pan-African movement by contrast with the preceding period led by the diaspora. The distinction, however, is not so clear-cut. In this presentation, I would like to make a small contribution from a perspective of a historian of Africa and demonstrate the intellectual and political exchanges between Du Bois and West African leaders, namely Joseph Ephraim Casley Hayford, the Gold Coast leader of the National Congress of British West Africa, and Blaise Diagne, the Senegalese deputy known as the one who played a crucial role in hosting the first Pan-African Congress in Paris. While the life trajectories of all three actors are already well documented, the major part of their exchanges around the Congress could be consulted online thanks to the special collection of amassed libraries. Perhaps it is not necessary to present here the biographical facts about Du Bois. I will only limit to recalling some of his fundamental achievements as African American and eventually Pan-African activist by the time of the first Pan-African Congress in 1919. In 1895, he had already received his PhD from Harvard for his dissertation entitled The Suppression of the African Slave Trade to the United States of America, 1638-1870, which was published the next year. While this could be considered as his first engagement dealing with the conditions of African Americans, he was soon to move on with his political and intellectual activities by founding in 1897 the American Negro Academy and delivering before its members the Conservation of Races. At the turn of the 20th century, he brings the question into the international arena. While organizing an exhibition of photographs showing the lives of African Americans at the Universal Exposition of Paris, Du Bois joined the Pan-African Conference in London, for which he had drafted the resolutions. His most famous work, The Souls of Black Folk, was published in 1903, going through 6 printings by 1905, thus sanctioning him as a widely recognized scholar. In 1909, he joined the National Negro Committee, forerunner of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, founded the next year. Its journal, The Crisis, gave him a space for his political advocacies, especially during the wartime, connecting him also to the US authorities. Joseph Ephraim Casley Hayford was one of the leading political elites of the British colony of Gold Coast, and has certainly seen in Du Bois's figure a somewhat similarity to himself. Born to a priest father, Joseph was among the founding students of the Wesleyan Boys High School in Cape Coast, where he eventually returned as a teacher after having graduated from Fora Bay College in Freetown, Sierra Leone. Fora Bay College was founded in 1827 and hosted intellectuals from the whole West African region, but also over the Atlantic, thus contributing to the homogenization of practices and way of thinking of African intellectuals. He was also trained to become a barrister in England, where he started practicing. When he started his career in political activism back in Gold Coast as a member of Aborigines Rights Protection Society, he had already a large vision of the colonial situation under the British rule. While he does not mention the 1900 Pan-African Conference, he was already writing to Du Bois in 1904. So here I quote Casley Hayford. I have recently had the pleasure of reading your great work, The Souls of Black Folk, and it occurred to me that if leading thinkers of African race in America had the opportunity of exchanging thoughts with thinkers of the race in West Africa, this century would be likely to see the race program result. End of quote. Echoing clearly Du Bois's famous statement, the program of the 20th century is the program of the color line, Casley Hayford was already suggesting here a Pan-African response to it. He sent his works, Gold Coast Native Institutions and Africa and Africans to Bois, and signed this letter in postscriptum as an African. As the local education of Casley Hayford suggests, West African intellectual elites were not short of local references of what historian W.E.B called West African nationalist literature. Africanist Houghton of Sierra Leone had, as early as 1867, advocated the self-government of West Africa, while Edward Wilmot Blyden promoted the idea of West African unity and the cultural nationalism that accompanied it. Now, B.Diagne was born in Gorée Island, one of the 4 communes of Senegal, giving him French civil rights. He was educated to become a civil servant and started his career as an inspector of customs in 1892. He served in many places of the French Empire, the newly conquered Dahomey from 1892 to 1896, French Congo, the present-day Gabon, from 1897 to 1898, where he met a Senegalese Muslim leader, Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba, then in exile, Réunion from 1898 to 1902, Madagascar from 1902 to 1909, where he opposed the governor Gallieni implementing the politique de race, and finally French Guyana from 1910 to 1914, where he got to know deputies of French West Indies, Gracien Cadence and Alexandre Issa, who pushed Diagne into politics. This imperial career and encounters with racial discriminations heightened the political consciousness of being black and of African descent. Therefore, when he announced his candidacy to the French Chamber of Deputies in 1914, his objective was to improve the conditions of his own kind. In the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, new elites, often educated in Occidental system, emerged in West African countries. An increasing number of local elites gained public audiences through their professional status as journalists, lawyers, and civil servants. Freetown, Cape Coast, Accra, and 4 communes of Senegal, Dakar, Saint-Louis, Gorée, and Rufisque, were the sites of political activities of those emerging local elites who prepared and supported the ascension of Casley Hayford and B.Diagne. It was, however, also the period during which the colonial rules have been established and institutionalized the racial discrimination. The emerging local elites felt thus frustrated, and their rights were denied and their aspirations dampened. In British colonies, the Lugarian policy to rely on so-called native authorities excluded the educated elements from political sphere. B.Diagne, elected as a deputy representing Senegal at the Chamber of Deputies in Paris in 1914, and Casley Hayford, elected to the Gold Coast Legislative Council in 1916, both struggled to expand the political rights to more Africans. They saw in the end of the World War I and the possibility of a new world order the occasion to claim for these rights. The first Pan-African Congress was thus planned in 1919 in Paris in order to influence the peace conference. The contribution of the black soldiers to the victory of the Allies was one of the major common arguments put forward by Pan-African leaders. They were also highly concerned about the future of German colonies in Africa as their potential ground for self-determination. The World War I definitely had a substantial impact on their struggles. B.Diagne was soon promoted to the rank of Commissioner of Republic, equivalent of General Governor, the highest authority in the colony, in charge of recruiting African soldiers. He saw in the wartime the opportunity for proving the role that could be played by Africans to the French nation, and thereby the argument for negotiating their rights. The proposed legislation that Diagne presented to the Assembly in 1915 and 1916 placed Africans born in the 4 communes of Senegal, as well as their descendants, under the obligation to serve in the French army, in exchange of which they could gain the full citizenship. In 1918, Diagne was on a tour in West Africa for propaganda for enrollment, arguing, by shedding the same blood, you will get the same rights. Interestingly, Du Bois also defended a similar vision regarding the African American soldiers during the war and declared in his address to the government, "We deem it hardly necessary in view of the untarnished record of Negro Americans to confirm our loyalty to our country and our readiness to make every sacrifice to win this war." What differs slightly with Diagne's case was that the US Army, unlike the French Army, was not always welcoming African Americans. When American Negroes patriotically offer their services to help win the war, these services are too often refused or accepted with reluctance or with disconcerting discrimination. Aside the discrimination in employment in the Army, Du Bois also denounced the condition of African American soldiers, which could impede their active, enthusiastic, and self-sacrificing participation in the war. By the end of the war, Du Bois took the same rhetoric in the letter he addressed to President Woodrow Wilson, and he even went back to the American Revolution to stress the sacrifice and contribution made by African Americans to the American nation, claiming thereby for equal rights. I quote, "From the Boston Massacre to the last Battle of Sedan, the American Negro has maintained traditions worthy of the American people." End quote. By placing them within the national history, and especially at the very foundation of the American nation, Du Bois underlined how African Americans belong to it, and more precisely, did constitute a whole component of it. Already in 1908, Du Bois had defined the Negro program as the fact that the definitely segregated mass of 8 million of Americans do not wholly share the national life of the people, and are not an integral part of the social body. And he points out the inherent contradiction of Wilsonian and American ideal, fighting for democracy abroad while not being able to realize democracy at home. I quote, "The International Peace Congress, that is to decide whether or not people shall have the right to dispose of themselves, will find in its midst delegates from a nation which champions the principle of the consent of the governed and government by representation. That nation is our own and includes in itself more than 12 million souls whose consent to be governed is never asked. They have no members in the legislatures where they are in the majority, and not a single representative in the National Congress." End of quote. The Peace Congress was thus an opportunity to internationalize what had been a social program of an American nation. More than to the black race within her borders, America owes to the world the solution of her race program from this very year. Du Bois concluded his letter to President Wilson. Du Bois had certainly seen in French politics of assimilation, and especially in Diagne's strategy of integration through enrollment, a model to which American politics should refer. In a confidential memorandum he addressed to two French deputies, Diagne and Cadence, regarding the Pan-African Congress to be held, he exposed his positive interpretation of French policy. There is no doubt that France, of all modern nations, is closer than any other country to a complete recognition of humanity despite all the racial difference. And above all, she puts into practice the principles of racial equality and treats civilized blacks as civilized men. There might have been a strategic side in Du Bois' approach to France, for it was a potential host country of the Congress. On the same note, the inaugural address made by Diagne also at the 1919 Congress also praised the French policy and highlighted the attachment to her. It was indeed worthy of France and of attachment that her overseas children have shown to her during the war, to welcome us and allow us, like other races, to examine what our future should be, that is to say, what should be the future of the entire black race, without there being any question of self-interest nor any idea of independence. Because, gentlemen, it is well understood that each of us coming here remains guided by the most sincere loyalty towards the nation to which he belongs, and thereby proclaims the desire and the right of each one to remain French, English, American, Liberian, Portuguese, or Belgian. Both Diagne and Du Bois used patriotism fueled during the wartime to claim for further integration. All Frenchmen, whatever the color of their skin, understand now and forever what it means to fight and to die together in defense of their fatherland, said W.E.B at the end of the war. At that time, Du Bois was planning to write a history of African American soldiers during the World War I. These soldiers could be and should be, Du Bois thought, at the forefront of their struggle for justice and democracy. In the crisis, the organ of the NAACP, Du Bois wrote, "For believing France and what she means and has meant and will mean to us and humanity, and against the threat of German race arrogance, we fought gladly and to the last drop of blood. For America and her highest ideals, we fought in far-off hope. But today we return. We stand again to look America squarely in the face. This country of ours is yet a shameful land. This is the country to which we soldiers of democracy return. This is the fatherland for which we fought. But if it is our fatherland, it was right for us to fight. The faults of our country are our faults. Make way for democracy. We saved it in France, and by great Jehovah, we will save it in the United States of America." End of quote. By qualifying the United States as our country, our fatherland, he was stressing how African Americans should be recognized as a constituent part of the American nation, and at the same time stirring a patriotic feeling among them. Du Bois's claim mirrored somehow Diagne's. By recalling American ideals widely spread in the world during the wartime, Du Bois claimed those ideals be applied equally within the United States. W.E.B, on the other hand, confident to represent himself the French colorblind policy, had appealed to take the French example as a starting point and to expand the benefits to his brothers of race in other parts of the world. Perhaps it is worth noting that Diagne too was fighting for the real colorblindness in the colonies. According to him, the French citizenship would guarantee the political equality, albeit the cultural backgrounds. The legislation that he had presented to the Assembly should permit the citizens from West African colonies to keep their personal status, that is to say, their religious and cultural habits. Diagne strategically played different roles at multiple levels, adopting in the international arena the figure of the black Frenchman, so to be considered as the right interlocutor. Proving their capacity to govern themselves was also a crucial matter for the emerging elites in British West Africa, especially as they were seeking emancipation from the native authorities. In 1914, Casley Hayford, together with other local intellectuals, came up with the idea of founding a political movement bringing together the four territories of British West Africa. In 1917, an open invitation to a conference was sent to the four colonies from Gold Coast Leader, the journal for which Casley Hayford served as editor. The conference was eventually postponed until the war ended, but the idea was welcomed so far by local elites, and the National Congress of British West Africa formally came into being in 1920. One of the objectives of the National Congress of British West Africa was to obtain a higher representation of Africans in local instances such as Legislative Council. The Constitution of NCBWA mentions indeed the fundamental principle that taxation goes with effective representation. The founding members of the NCBWA also saw in the peace settlement an opportunity to negotiate their political rights. They wrote to governors in their colony, demanding a say in the peace conference so that voice of West Africa would be heard internationally. Within the British Empire, India and Ceylon inspired the struggle for West African elites. Indian National Congress was founded in 1885, Ceylon National Congress in 1918, and delegates from India were invited to the peace conference. A new constitution announced in 1920 gave Ceylon representative government, stirring further the West African nationalism. In this great war, we all united for the common cause in common sacrifice for common hopes, and surely if this concession is made to Ceylon, why not to British West Africa? Declared Casley Hayford at a meeting between NCBWA delegates and members of League of Nations Union, a British peace movement organization. In the aftermath of World War I, the question of whether or not Africans are capable of governing themselves was also raised regarding the future of German colonies in Africa. Having learned that one of the main protagonists of the peace settlement, Robert Cecil of English cabinet, precluded a return of the German colonies, Du Bois consulted President Wilson's advisor, George Foster Peabody. If Cecil's pronouncement is to be the attitude of the Allies, as seems probable, then logically the Allies are going to need strong reasons. If now a strong demand on the part of the Negroes of the world against the return of the colonies to Germany could be made, would it not tremendously strengthen the moral foundation of a just peace? Would not this be in the hands of allies an effective weapon? And on the other hand, would it not be a heartening thing for Negroes to feel that they are being thus consulted and their wishes taken account of? End of quote. On the same line, the NCBW later condemned the Anglo-French partition of Togo in the Treaty of Versailles without the consultation of Africans. We had no fight against either Britain or France. They fought Germany, and we came to their aid and helped them. By what right can they come and partition our lands between them without consulting us? Declared Casley Hayford. The partitioning of former German colonies between European powers without any consultation of Africans was also considered as a threat to the integrity of other parts of the continent at the very moment when West African elites were claiming for their unity. The resolution of the Constitutive Conference of the NCBWA stated their desire for assurance that under no circumstances a consenting part to the integrity of any of the 4 British West African colonies be disturbed. Casley Hayford stated clearly how the hope held out to the whole of the peoples of the world as regards the right of individual peoples to self-determination had been shattered, and their confidence deeply shaken. Their struggle continued, however, and the Third Pan-African Congress in 1923 demanded that people of African descent be represented in the Mandates Commission of the League of Nations and in the International Labour Organization. Indeed, it was during the interwar period that many associations and political movements were founded by Africans of the continent and of the diaspora, constantly referring to each other's movement as to make a Pan-African network through Europe, America, and Africa. Under these circumstances, the Second Pan-African Congress took place successively in London, Brussels, and Paris in 1921. During the London session, the African delegation present was larger than that of 1919, remedying slightly the gap felt by West Africans. They had noted in 1919, West Africans do well to remember that to most of our Afro-American and West Indian friends, we are still in the backwoods of civilization, unlettered, untutored, very much requiring articulation through our brethren on the other side of the Atlantic. They know no better. They have no means of judging. It is for us to enlighten them, to make them realize that nationhood has dawned in the West African horizon, and that we mean to take our free, independent place in the great imperial chain. Casley Hayford has also written to Du Bois in this regard. We are following with keen interest here the Pan-African Conference movement, and I only wish that there was time for West Africa to be represented, as we could throw considerable light upon matters affecting West interest here. I wonder if you see the Gold Coast leader. If so, the issues from the beginning of this year up to the end of March and later will throw considerable light upon the situation here. It is interesting to notice here a touch of power politics between the African and the African American, the discrepancy to be expressed further in the 1950s. Casley Hayford had pointed out more firmly these differences in his fiction, Ethiopia Unbound, published in 1911. Regarding Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk, one could therefore read, it is apparent that Mr. Du Bois writes from an American standpoint, surrounded by an American atmosphere. And of course, it is not his fault. It is not his fault, for he knows no other. Through the mouth of Pramankura, the main character, a Gold Coast lawyer studying in London, just like Casley Hayford himself, he compared the Afro-American school of thought to the African school of thought. According to him, the Afro-American school of thought is seeking intellectually and materially to show himself a man along the lines of progress of the white man, whereas in the African school of thought, the black man is engaged upon the discovery of his true place in creation upon natural and national lines. And Pramankura, or Casley Hayford, praises Blyden as a representing figure of the African school who had led Africans back unto self-respect. We as a people have our own status, the customs and institutions of our forefathers, which we cannot neglect and live. This vision may be caricatural, but contains some reality, for Du Bois considered African Americans as the advance guard of the Negro people, and believed in their potential leadership in Africa. It is also worth mentioning that in Casley Hayford's fiction, a Pan-African conference took place in Gold Coast in 1905 at the invitation of the Gold Coast Aborigines Rights Protection Society, proving thereby an African leadership. A serious conflict opposed also Diagne to Du Bois during the Second Congress in 1921, where the London session from which Diagne was absent had adopted a rather radical resolutions condemning openly the imperialism. Diagne, as chairman of the Congress, refused to submit this motion to the vote of the Congress on account of its communist and too radical theories. There is also a kind of political competition between Diagne and Du Bois, for Diagne was conscious of his influence that had made the 1919 Congress possible and was eager to prove his authority as a spokesman of Africans against that of Du Bois. As we have seen, intellectual elites of African descent in the United States and in the West Indies were constantly exchanging with Africans on the continent at the beginning of the 20th century. The contribution of Africans themselves was thus also fundamental to the constitution of Pan-Africanism. For instance, Du Bois, Casley Hayford, and Diagne were all conscious of the similarity of their respective situations and kept referring to each other to achieve the shared objective of fighting their marginality both at home and abroad. It was through this shared feeling of marginality that Pan-African consciousness grew to constitute a significant dynamic during the interwar period. Increasing divergences of Pan-African movements, however, suggest that they had gained a certain maturity. Whereas they needed to connect to each other to constitute the movement itself, they were now competing for its representation. In any case, these leaders needed to stand equal to their Occidental interlocutors to be fully considered as a legitimate political actor, the recognition that would also reinforce their political position at home.
Thank you.